Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here for the SIweather.com. Well, we're now approaching the latter part of the month of August. Late in July, on July 27th, we put out a video on our website that details some possible clues about the upcoming winter in the Mid-Atlantic region for 2012-2013. I'd like to revisit that topic today with a focus on the developing El Nino in the tropical part of the Pacific Ocean. This particular map shows the sea surface temperature anomalies, the departure from normal for the sea surface temperatures, where you see yellows and oranges right here, for example, in the Pacific Ocean west of South America. This represents above normal sea surface temperatures right now. In other words, this is the El Nino condition that's been developing for the last month or two. Transition from a La Nina, where it was colder than normal last winter, and even the prior winter we had a La Nina conditions in the tropical part of the Pacific. And one of the things that the El Nino tends to do for mid-Atlantic winters is activate the subtropical jet streak, which tends to run across the southern part of the U.S. and then perhaps right up the east coast. And in other words, the El Nino tends to increase the possibility of coastal storms and in general leads to more precipitation during an upcoming winter. So that is one potential result of this developing El Nino. Now, there are a couple things that are important in terms of looking back at analog years and looking at historically what El Ninos have done. Quite a bit depends on if it's a strong El Nino versus a weak El Nino, and if it's a centrally based El Nino. In other words, right out here in the Central Pacific, if this is where the greatest departure from normal occurs, as opposed to an eastern based El Nino, which is where the greatest departure of normal temperatures would occur right off the South American coast. Right now it looks like the greatest departure from normal, these oranges right here, would indicate a potential east-based El Nino. However, there are reasons to believe that that may be changing to more of a central-based. And historically, central-based El Ninos tend to favor colder winters here in the eastern part of the U.S. as compared to eastern-based. Elsewhere, we continue to have colder than normal temperatures in the northern part of the Pacific. This kind of a horseshoe-shaped pattern here, and this is followed by an index we call the PDO, Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which kind of slipped into a cold phase a few years ago, and that should continue for quite a while. Meanwhile, out in the Atlantic, we have a lot of above normal temperatures here in the northern Atlantic, as the Atlantic Ocean continues in a warm phase, and that's tracked by an index we call the AMO, the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation. And this is the reason why the Arctic sea ice has been basically below normal over the last several years. Once the Atlantic slips into a colder phase, perhaps in a few years, the ice will change as well, and that'll return back to normal, perhaps even above normal. This is the main cause of the below normal ice extent in the Arctic over the last several years. So El Nino developing right now, and let's focus in on whether it'll be an east base or central base and a strong or weak El Nino. Well, this particular plot here shows many different models, dynamical models which factor in current weather conditions, and statistical models here which tend to lead towards climatological statistics. But the bottom line looking at this plot is that it appears to me that it looks like we'll have a weak to moderate El Nino, not a strong El Nino in the upcoming winter. Anything above this line is an El Nino, positive values. So you see these values over here. This is 0 and plus 0.5 and plus 1.0. When you get anywhere above like 1.5 and above, that's generally considered to be a strong El Nino. Anything down here on the negative sides continue to be La Ninas. So 1.5 and above, strong El Nino, and below that, weak to moderate. The consensus here in yellow of the dynamical models shows that come December, January, and February, which is shown right here, it's roughly 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, a weak to moderate type El Nino when you average together all these particular models. Now this could change, but for right now it looks like, if you believe these models, and there's a whole range of models that give us a high confidence in this, looks like we will continue to evolve into an El Nino, and that'll be a weak to moderate El Nino by the time the winter approaches. Now, I went back to 1950 and tried to compile the number of strong El Nino winters versus weak to moderate El Nino winters and what kind of an impact that had on the wintertime temperatures here across the U.S. This particular map here shows the effect of a strong El Nino dating back to 1950. All these were strong El Nino years right here, and this is the result of temperatures. Quite a warm pattern here, especially in the northern half of the U.S. All these reds, yellows, and oranges represent warmer than normal temperatures in the December, January, and February time frame when there was a strong El Nino in the December, January, and February time frame. So again, quite an impact here. Warm air basically floods the U.S. when there's a strong El Nino, especially the northern half, and this is what to expect if there was a strong El Nino. Now, on the other hand, how about a weak to moderate El Nino? Well, here you go. This is quite dramatically different. This is a series of years here where there were weak to moderate El Ninos. Looking at those numbers we saw earlier, that was a 1.3 and below. I classified as weak to moderate El Nino. The strong El Ninos I classified as 1.4 and above, dating back to 1950. Weak El Ninos produce colder than normal temperatures here in the east. So this is quite dramatically different from a strong El Nino. That's why we really focus on the magnitude of the El Nino. So again, right now, it appears as if we'll be headed to more of a pattern like this in the upcoming winter because of a weak to moderate El Nino. Well, one final chart I'd like to look at here. We talked about a central base versus eastern base, and historically central-based El Ninos tend to favor colder than normal weather in the mid-Atlantic for the winter, whereas eastern base may actually lead toward more warmer than normal temperatures. Now, there's reason to believe that we may be headed to more of a central-based El Nino here. In the last 30 days, this particular region right here in the central tropical Pacific has seen quite a dramatic increase in sea surface temperatures, whereas right along the South American coast, there's been quite a departure on the downside, on the negative side, a cooling off of the sea surface temperatures relative to normal. So if this trend continues, it looks like this El Nino will be more of a central base, which leads to colder weather in the mid-Atlantic region. So we'll, of course, continue to monitor this over the next several months. One of the other factors I like to look at before we get to a winter outlook is the snow cover in North America that develops during the autumn. And, of course, we're too early for that now, so we'll monitor that over the next several months. But the facts remain that some of these clues indicate that a cold and snowy or stormy winter is certainly on the table for the Mid-Atlantic based on this developing El Nino in the tropical Pacific. So we'll monitor this over the next few months and provide updates before we finally put out a winter outlook later in the fall. For the SIweather.com, I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.